Hello and welcome to the pod. This is our Black Monday special, although it hasn't been that black, only really all the Chargers going, or offensive stuff going anyway, off their not off their own accord. I'm Oscar Hazel. You can follow the show at MiamiPod, themiamipod.com. We're recording this live on Monday night. And I'm joined by Ian Wharton. You can follow NFL Film Study and find his work at Bleacher Report and draftcentric.weebly.com. So first off, we're going to just talk quickly about the Patriots game and just kind of how we have the last couple of months, mainly about young players, and then get on to kind of all the hundreds of names that have been linked to the Dolphins, as well as front office changes. And we'll probably, as we find out more about the front office, we'll have kind of more to talk about, but we can just say our initial takeaways. Before we get to that, anything in particular you take away from the Patriots game other than draft position?
The draft position thing didn't bother me. I think Miami dropped one or two spots.
Yeah, but at least
with the win.
We're picking.
Yeah.
There's not a huge difference between 6 and 8, or whatever.
No, it's not like the difference between 3 or 4 and 8 or 10. Then you're starting to say okay, Miami missed on an elite talent.
Especially in this class where there's no kind of elite.
Yeah, so it's an interesting class. It's a good class. It's just not there's not too many great players. You've got Tunsil and Ramsey, Bosa, although he's not elite. So it's an interesting class, but yeah, takeaways from the game, really encouraged by what we saw from Devontae Parker, Ryan Tannehill. Those two continue to be growing, and it's very positive entering next year. Defensively, we saw some Terrence Fede action.
Only a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I'll take it.
He still played more in the first 4 weeks than he has the rest of the season.
It's still crazy. It's crazy to think, but overall, Miami was more than competent. They benefited from New England obviously being so conservative. They were clearly, I think, trying to show what they were working on for the playoffs. They know that they need a solid running game in the playoffs because their offensive line and wide receiver situation is pretty bad. Edelman wasn't playing, and that was a pretty big difference. They just don't really have the receivers right now to do much, which is pretty crazy, even saying that facing the Dolphins defense. Encouraging stuff from Neville Hewitt. I think we knew that probably one of the 4 linebackers Miami signed would emerge as a rosterable player moving into the future. We just didn't really know which one. Somewhat unfortunately for Miami, the one that plays the position they need the least on the linebacker crew, weak side linebacker, a player emerged at that spot. But, once Jelani Jenkins comes back, maybe you do Neville Hewitt and Jenkins in obvious pass situations. Hewitt had a great game, I thought.
In coverage on Gronk, do you think that means he could play some Sam? Because, it's not like there's a great deal of tight ends that are incredible blockers. So maybe you can get away with a smaller Sam, and because you're going to be facing kind of more coverage guys.
Yeah, it's very possible. I think it
depends on the defensive coordinator as well, a lot.
Right. It depends on the defensive coordinator, and it also depends on the middle linebacker that you add. I think that I would lean toward you can get away with it if you can add a guy like Reggie Ragland from Alabama, which you're going to pay a premium to get him in the draft. But that would give you a true traditional middle linebacker. He's got enough coverage skills, and then that way he's going to help make up for some of the run defending, not necessarily issues, but possible limitations that you may have with either Jenkins or Hewitt at strong side linebacker. I would be at least more willing to try that as a solution. And I think that at least in passing downs, I think you'd get away with it because of the athleticism of that group. It's not super dynamic, like for example, like Jalen Smith would be, but we have no idea what he's going to be.
Yeah, that was
So
brutal.
we can't even speculate on him until we get some more information on what his injury is. But I mean, I thought probably Hewitt, Parker, and Tannehill showed me the most this week.
I thought Albert was a bit low in his stance. He looked a bit better in pass protection, at least at the beginning of the game. Then he kind of rose as the game went on. But the line was pretty good in pass protection overall. It was just in the run game, like after the first couple of drives, they were really getting pushed around. And it was pretty much everyone. So that's kind of a concern. They couldn't really run it at all. And we maybe did, like, I guess there's always been this talk about Tannehill and making checks at line of scrimmage, and we saw a lot of running into 8-man boxes. So whether there's still some limitation, and obviously you can't change the playbook, you can't have like audibles for every situation, because you need to, it's not just about teaching Tannehill, it's about teaching every single player. So maybe there's still some limitations there. But I thought he had a pretty good game. I guess, shall we talk about kind of like still the same releases by Parker, but I thought it was that I think it was that first sideline catch on the left where it was the double move that he sold much better than we've kind of seen previously. So that was really good. And then obviously the contested catch was like, that's kind of what you're hoping for from a high draft pick, is to make plays that no one else can. And you like are not 50-50s, that's like a 10% chance of making that play.
Yeah, that's exactly what you hope for, because that doesn't really take polish to do. That's just being the dominant player, and that's what you really needed to see from Parker on occasion. He had struggled at contested catches earlier in the season, and I don't know if it's just confidence. I wouldn't say he dominated on that play, but he finished the play.
Lucky. But he kind of has like, there was like that first catch he made. I didn't really like the way he went with his hands, with his so he went with his thumbs both down, or like he went with like his palms up. So this is like being from England and playing cricket. Like in the slips, you meant to go with like your thumbs up, and he went kind of like his thumbs sideways. So he's kind of like snapped at it slightly, and I think because they were going at quite a bit of a tempo, they didn't challenge it, but maybe that could have been a bobbled ball. So I'd like to, that's just kind of like a small thing where prefer his hands to be better there, but he has really strong hands.
Yeah.
So that kind of, and that really helped him on that jump ball. As Lamar Miller had his first game of 20 runs. So maybe it was a last gasp effort to try and appease him before he hit free agency.
Which is weird, because the previous 2 weeks they just kind of
let him not play. But so maybe they've had a change of heart, or who knows.
Yeah, it was kind of strange too to see Damian Williams get like almost a couple entire drives.
Mm-mm.
That was just really weird. Like, why wouldn't you just get
I think that's when they were basically not running the ball anymore, and so they seem to like Williams over Ajayi when it's passing situations.
It's so weird.
Yeah. But I think that
Williams had that nice play, though. I mean, he had that nice wheel route. Yeah. I mean, that is his better strength. He is a better receiver, I think, than a runner. It's just interesting. It's just kind of surprising things. He's kind of like that forgotten guy.
And I guess the other piece of note is Stills had an injury, a hamstring, so he didn't play.
He was so disappointing this year.
Yeah, that first play was really weird. If anyone was in the stadium, like if the sun was behind him, because he just basically quit on the ball, and they said the sun wasn't anywhere near there. So that was kind of weird, just to completely quit on it. Maybe he thought he was like covered and the ball wouldn't be going his way. So that's kind of interesting. I guess defensively, it's nice to see DeAndre Coleman play quite a bit. He's playing more than Fade, which is incredible. But regardless, I thought he played really well. And then
he's better than Jordan Phillips.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's like 2 or 3 years into his career now.
Yeah,
He's a bit
that's
more
true.
versatile as well. He can play a bunch of positions. I think he's only 1 year into his um, season, but yeah, I like Coleman. I thought he'd make the 53. It took a while, and I thought Lippett had a pretty good game. There was that one. Was it the slant where he made a play on the ball, or there was like a post?
Yeah, yeah, it was an underthrown deep post,
Yeah,
which he had a nice break on it. He showed decent recovery speed. I
he
mean, he
did get
got
beat
beat
in the game.
physically. I mean, if that ball is thrown 5 yards further, I mean, he got torched by, like, we're talking like 3 or 4 yards. I mean, I saw someone like saying, "Oh, I told you about Tony Lippett." Like, that was actually really like that's a loss. He got killed on that play, and it wasn't necessarily because of technique. It was just because of just athleticism. So, I mean, I'm not saying Lippett's a bad thing. I mean, he's way too inexperienced at that position to really start worrying about anything.
But
And I'm
that's a
glad that
nice
he's getting playing
confidence.
time. But like, don't say that he won that route because he played the ball or anything like that.
Phillips was pretty awful. He was just getting turned all the time. There was an interesting report. Someone, I can't remember who, was saying, maybe it was Barry Jackson, that they're disappointed with Phillips. And to me, that's because he's not really making play. He's not really tipping balls anymore because offensive lines have scouted that, and they're batting his hands back down. So I've seen that a couple of times where he's been trying to like jump up and get his arms up, but like O-line are just basically smacking his hands back down. So now that part of his game has been like taken away. He doesn't really have a counter, and yeah, just in the run game, one-on-ones against left guards, he's getting turned, and it happened like 3 times in a row. Um, so that's not great. And yeah, they just ran at Ovi. Probably Sue had a pretty bad game, I thought. Um, but I mean, who cares? I don't think Richard played that well either. But I mean, I think he was just playing this season after week 4 for Pro Bowl, and yeah, so he mailed this one in. Um, Anyone else kind of stand out to you? DeAndre Moore or
No, I didn't notice them at all.
Moore made that one tip pass, but I thought he was pretty bad against the run.
Yeah, yeah, I'd seen that too. It's really the only time I ever noticed him, even since he's joined the Dolphins. So,
He's
um,
quite a weird build, and he was mainly in pass rush situations. Um, I thought Shelby had a really good game actually. One of his better games. I think he had like a sack and a hit, and so made some plays and run. So I think he'll be kind of an interesting guy to watch. But anyway, we'll stop talking about the Dolphins. They won. The season's over. It was a really weird game. And we'll move on to. Should we start with Chris Greer being announced the Dolphins GM and Hickey moving on? Greer, I think he was an intern first with the Patriots, and so he was there kind of during the Parcells time and when Belichick was a defensive coordinator. Then he came to the Dolphins and has worked here ever since, mainly working in college scouting. I think he's been like the head of the college scouting for like 6-7 years. So that's kind of he had some interesting kind of comments in his like introductory press thing saying how he's like wants like Dolphins to stop being like an embarrassment or something like that, like they have been for the last 10 years. And it's kind of like, oh, that's rich from someone that's been here for that whole period of time, like one of the few people that's been here that whole time. I mean, I don't really have much to say on him. I don't really know what he's done other than like the Dolphins haven't been particularly great at drafting. So, but he did have he was the last round stages of Eagles last year GM applications and also was up for the Jets job. So obviously he's relatively well respected, and I think he was kind of offered something this year. At least teams made an application, but he obviously just decided to take the Dolphins job.
yeah, I believe he said that he was offered an interview already this off season as well, which would suggest that I think the Lions.
It could be.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know how to feel about it. We don't know. The thing is we don't know who he's caped for. We don't know who he was high on, who he's missed on. And, that's just the limitation of what we know and what we don't know. I mean, the thing with GMs is like I feel like I don't even know how like these assistant GMs and people get a good reputation. Like, is it just coming from within the organization? Like it's just weird to me. Like we don't know unless if you're a GM and you clearly had, a lot of power within the organization. I just feel like we're just guessing. So it's like to me, he's been in the organization for a long time. You know what you're getting with him. You're hoping that he's going to align well, and if he can scout. The thing is like Tannenbaum just wants the people to report to him to be very good at what they do, keep them in a single lane, and then he will make the final call with the educated opinions of others around him. And so for me, we'll see if Grier works out. I mean, I don't know if we're ever going to know if it's really Grier working out or not, but I'm giving some trust to Tannenbaum on this, and if he thinks that Grier and his staff are good talent evaluators, we'll see how it plays out. It's one way to ensure that people are going to be on the same page. Everyone kind of falls into what the structure should be, and I think that's a positive. You're not hiring a guy like Ray Farmer who, Farmer and he was somewhat the
Or
victim
even
of
like
circumstances.
you're not even hiring a guy like Hal Tannenbaum came in, where we've seen like reports from Jeff Darlington saying like him and Hickey were on opposite side of the buildings, not even talking. So I mean, that's like you're not hiring someone like that. There's a relationship there already. Whereas I think if you were just going off the success of Tannenbaum, if just off this previous year, I think you wouldn't have hired Tannenbaum, or you would have done it that year. You hired Hickey, you would have just hired Tannenbaum instead that year. If you could like rewrite history, because I think that it hasn't gone that great. Tannenbaum had some like interesting comments about like they haven't decided on how much power the head coach will get. But he was mainly talking about 53-man power, which pretty much most coaches get. Like Philbin had 53-man personnel power, because that's basically like the GM gives you a 90-man roster, which obviously you like help like give a template for. But we saw so many different player profiles with each GM. With Philbin, I think that kind of shows you that it's more GM led until the 53, and then it's like the coach picks the guys he wants at the end. So did you take anything particularly away from that? Do you think they would be willing to give someone like more of like a fuller control, or do you think is that only dependent if it's like a real big name?
Yeah, I think it'd have to be that real big name. But as we've kind of started to see leaking out, and it's gonna be interesting because Rap Sheet tweeted not too long ago that Sean Payton and the Saints owner Benson had just kind of wrapped up the meeting. I guess compensation for what I'm assuming that's going to be trade compensation, but I'm not for sure on that. I'm just kind of assuming what he had tweeted. So I mean, and we'd seen earlier that maybe like a mid-round pick if you waited out for. I mean, the thing is with the NFL is like if the NFL knows that you're going to be traded or they're trying to trade you, they're just going to wait till you're cut. Yeah, like they're just going to wait till you're released. Then he probably won't be released, but like someone's going to give up like the team he's going to go to, he's not going to want to give up a second round pick. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like that's completely ass backward. So
Track had a great tweet where if they got a second round pick for him, if their current cap situation, they wouldn't be able to sign that second round pick.
So, that's unbelievable. They've been so mismanaged. So it's like that's the thing too. It's like I think Miami would be willing to if they could get a guy like Peyton, but things that have been kind of coming out, and this isn't anything I've heard, but just kind of seems where what others are saying, it seems like for whatever reason, it seems like those two parties just aren't really interested in each other, whether it be for compensation. To be quite frankly, I mean, I'm a fan of Peyton, and I would have been supportive of a hire of him. But there are still major questions, I think, that are fair to say about Peyton, especially, if he has any control on the roster, honestly, that would scare me. Because what's happened in New Orleans is directly, I think, a big part of Sean Payton. The defense is literally one of the worst in NFL history. So I don't have any trust that he could rebuild the defense. So I think that it's good to not give the wrong coach much power. Again, you just kind of want the head coach and the GM. You want them to have a good balance of power. You really need to have almost like, I'm trying to think of a really good example of this. Probably like thinking Green Bay. Like Green Bay, I think is kind of known, but they're known for very strong personnel men. But their coaching staff too has, I know at least in
bred like, it's like the scouts like trust the coaches as well. There's no one like, and they keep everything in house, and it's like there's no one going behind backs or whatever if something goes wrong. It's like everyone's accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of what you're looking for there.
Which is a kind of Tannenbaum in the presser for Greer was kind of like saying, oh, you need to have like all the scouts talking to all the coaches and et cetera. But I just thought that's kind of interesting coming after like leaks where he and his GM of last year weren't even talking. So that's kind of like ironic that you like that's what you're looking for in a staff, but you couldn't manage to do that. So it'll just be kind of interesting. So I guess we'll talk about like the news quickly, and like I assume the Payton to Giants is kind of a thing with Coughlin leaving the Giants but not retiring, and that would be really interesting in terms of like something at least like I've been lusting after and making Ian lust after is Ben McAdoo being an offensive coordinator option. So that's something to look out for if they go like a defensive minded coach, and obviously then Coughlin is also on the table. And I think like he would be a pretty good big name to go after. Should we talk about Coughlin now?
Yeah, sure.
So I guess for me, you would want Ben McAdoo coming with him. That would be like, so you have like the experienced, respected, like winning coach in Coughlin, like with Super Bowl rings, and like even like having Landry and Beckham, that connection with the coaching stuff, that kind of maybe helps as well. Like someone to say, oh, this is how it kind of works. I think Paysinger was a Giant as well. So you have like a little bit more of a connection there. If Paysinger is on the roster next year. And so that maybe like helps the locker room dynamic as well and free agents. And then you kind of groom McAdoo, who I think is one of the best offensive coordinators. And that's kind of like, a couple of people asked me if I think he should be a head coach. I mean, if that's the way you have to get him, then I think that's fine, but I'd rather have him as an offensive coordinator and like help him learn that, like develop that craft with kind of an experienced head coach kind of running everything. We haven't really put like a totem pole of like where we have kind of like each coach, but would Coughlin be kind of up there for you?
So I actually have zero interest in Tom Coughlin. And the reason being is, and not trying to be an ageist or anything like that, the man's going to be 70 years old at the start of next season. The only reason he should be coming to South Florida is for his retirement. We've noted, I think even on this show this season, how many bad games the Giants have lost in late in games this year. Outside of Ben McAdoo, I don't think Coughlin's really built a strong staff in the last several years.
Yeah, chopping and changing quite a lot.
Yeah, and I just that should have been the division winner this year in that division. The moment that Tony Romo went down, that should have been by far the team that pulled away. and they had a great offensive coordinator with decent talent on offense. Like I won't say they have good offensive talent, but Eli Manning, he improved a little bit under McAdoo. But it's just like you look at that team, and it's just like, what did Tom Coughlin do for that team the last several years? Yeah, I know he's a 2-time Super Bowl winner. I know that he helped pilot some magical runs, but it's like if you take away that terrific pass rush and Eli Manning like going bananas those 2 years, Tom Coughlin was almost fired like 4 different times.
I think like the front office has been pretty whack the last couple of years. Outside of like Hankins and Odell Beckham, they haven't really got much.
Yeah. And so I mean, I guess
That-
what you're wanting to sell someone on Coughlin is that Coughlin's a short-term guy, comes in, quote unquote, changes the culture. You're using some buzzwords there.
grooms McAdoo. That's to me,
Yeah,
that's like the thing. I want McAdoo.
right. Now, if you can get McAdoo with him, I'm a little intrigued. Just because I want McAdoo. And I will
Okay,
say I
so
do.
this is like a nice transition to like Mike and Kyle Shanahan. So Mike
Yes.
Shanahan is going to interview tomorrow. So I think that's kind of like a nice transition. So Shanahan is a bit younger, but still like up there, and he has like I know lots of people have been saying he's like the same age or like a bit younger than Bruce Arians or something. But
Yeah.
like Shanahan has like war wounds. Like Arians came in like fresh, not have like being an OC is a lot less stressful than
Right.
like Shanahan's been a head coach for a long time. Like
Yeah. So
he's got cut up.
he's 6 years younger than Tom Coughlin, and he's 6 weeks older than Bruce Arians.
But I mean, he's been
Yeah.
through wars.
He's been around a long time. Yeah.
So for me, it's like I love Shanahan's offense, but I think I love the adaptation that Kyle Shanahan has on it and the way in which he can cater it to personnel and quarterbacks in particular. So to me, it's like if you can get Kyle Shanahan, and maybe that's you have to give him like an assistant head coach kind of position. That was kind of rumored last year as his way to get out of the Browns, but I think the Browns just let him go in the end, even without that, because he was kind of interviewing with his dad. So that could be kind of something interesting, whether that comes up if there's an out there. And generally, like teams don't want to keep a coach against their will, so they will kind of let them go. And I mean, it's like Carl had a good start at Atlanta, but that whole team kind of went off the trolley. Is there any much more you want to talk about Mike Shanahan? I mean, we've kind of talked about both him and Kyle quite a bit already.
Yeah, I think that he is probably my favorite name listed for the job, and I know that Hugh Jackson, Jeff Darlington just reported that Hugh Jackson will be interviewing with Miami, or at least I should say they put in a request to interview Jackson as soon as Sunday, depending on if the Bengals lose or not. Which
So
I do.
They've done the same for Todd Haley as well. That was reported by I think Rappaport.
Yeah, so nothing will happen until they interview Jackson because they've got to fulfill the Rooney Rule. But I will just say,
Terrell Austin, so they've already done that.
Yeah, that's right, Terrell Austin. So I think that Mike Shanahan's such a good fit, just because he's like Coughlin in terms of you're bringing in the big name, you're bringing in the accomplished coach. I just heard a radio segment with him a couple weeks ago here in DC area. The guy still completely gets the game. He understands the importance of surrounding a quarterback with complementary talent. I mean, it's what he's done his whole career, and he's been very successful with it. Are there risks with him? Absolutely.
I guess something we've got to say is like there is no perfect candidate. If there was, like, he would be locked up for like a 20-year deal. He would be Bill Belichick, and even he's not perfect. There's blemishes.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too is Bill Walsh. They were mentioning something about him where he had a quote where he was saying basically around 10 years in one place, and you need to move on. Yeah, you're done at 10 years because just it's time to do something bigger and better. So, I just think that Shanahan can come in for 5 or so years, especially if he can get Kyle Shanahan on the on board as the assistant head coach, offensive coordinator. That's really the best way to go, I think. And again, is it perfect? No, but and kind of transitioning to Hugh Jackson, we've talked about him, but that's good news too that they're interviewing him, and it seems like a very thorough search. I was just,
it's everyone but Chip Kelly that basically.
yeah, it's kind of surprising.
But maybe, I mean, we only just heard about Hugh Jackson, so maybe.
Yeah, and we didn't hear about Mike Shanahan for 2 weeks. He interviewed back in December 22nd, and no one knew until
Sherman and Tannenbaum kind of said that wasn't really a meeting. He was just kind of, that wasn't an official meeting or interview. That was just kind of him having a conversation, and he's talking to lots of people type thing. So he played down that, and the official one will be later this week.
That would make sense then, because I'm sure they've talked to a bunch of big guys. Like, I'm sure people would probably freak out if they probably talked to guys like Urban Meyer, for example, or either through back channels or whatever.
Basically, if you hear of any single coach has talked to an NFL team, it's Miami Dolphins. That's my feels. Like, there was a tweet out that one team is interested in Mike Smith. It was like, okay, that's the Dolphins. Like a day later, yeah, Mike Smith just finished his interview with the Dolphins. Should you move on to Mike Smith? Because a lot of people have been asking why we don't like him. Should I take this? So for me, it's kind of similar to Chuck Pagano. It's like a defensive-minded coach, and in particular, his last 2-3 years at Atlanta is pretty much one of the worst defenses in the league. And in particular to the construct of the Miami defense, where they're going into this next year, he really struggled trying to find edge rush, and we got a massive question mark at edge rusher. So I don't think you want to have a coach that couldn't find a solution in 4 or 5 years going for a team, and to then that's their first main role is to okay, what's the solution at edge rusher? Also, I think even as a coordinator, he was pretty good at Jacksonville. He had good times at early in Atlanta as well. I always felt those big games, they would just get gashed. I always remember, I think maybe it was even his last game with Jacksonville, where Wes Welker just had that huge game for the Patriots, and they just got completely annihilated. And I just don't think he's to me, there's something we'll go on to another coach that has just been linked that we hadn't really heard about before that we were going to mention anyway. But I don't see adjustments or him changing much. And they made that really architected way of trying to stop the run, and that would force pressure in 2014. And they couldn't even stop the run. They spent all this money just trying to stop the run. And it's to me, if you're you're forcing a change so much and you can't even do it, and that's your area of expertise. And I mean that they had injuries a lot, especially the linebacker position. But I mean, every team has injuries, and that 13-14 seasons, they were literally the worst defense in the league. So that's kind of why, similar to Chuck Pagano, it's I don't trust coaches that don't have a good team in the position that they're meant to know about. Is there any reason why you don't particularly like him?
I don't like his personality, for one. I saw him run practices at the Senior Bowl, and quite frankly, they made me want to go to sleep. I don't know why someone my age, that's 24, between your age, which is a little older, thinking as a professional athlete, why anyone would want to play for somebody like him. It's not. I honestly, I just don't think he's a good coach. I just don't think he can coach at this level effectively. I saw nothing there. None of the players were into it. He wasn't really particularly strong, and his staff wasn't particularly strong at instruction, at trying new things. It was so nonchalant. and just ineffective that it was like I knew entering that next season that Mike Smith was going to be done as the head coach there. You just knew it because he creates no buy-in with his players. And you compare that to even a guy like Gus Bradley, and it's like, yeah, Gus Bradley's struggling, but it's like at least he's winning with the players. Like he's winning one part of the battle, which is creating that buy-in. You've got to have both sides, and I think that there's, the special ones get both sides. But I mean, Mike Smith and his staff didn't do anything. I think the most intriguing guy, if you're going to be talking about from former Falcons coaches, would be Dirk Cutter more than.
He's another name he was floated around early, but I haven't seen him listed as someone that's going to come in for an interview, but maybe that'll come later. So we'll see. Or maybe just trying to see. Can't see him in my notes of like the last day, but I think like 2 days ago, just before going into, he was kind of mentioned quite a bit. On the last thing on like Mike Smith, a lot of people just mentioned like the win-loss records. But I mean, he won 10 games the last 2 seasons. That division was pretty trash when they were doing really well. Like you just get 3 wins against the Panthers and Tampa for a lot of that period. And there's a 1 year where no Sean Payton, and that went pretty well for them. So I mean, there's like always context within these things, but saying that, it's like the interest is real. They offered him the defensive coordinator job in week 5, and so maybe that's why he got the first interview. That was kind of like, okay, well, I'll be interested in the head coaching job, but I don't want to take the defensive coordinator. Do you want to give me the first interview type thing? And they'll be like, okay, yeah, you at least entertained us by saying you might take this awful defensive coordinator job halfway through the season or a quarter way through the season. So maybe that's kind of like the context of the timing of that interview. Should we move on to Dirk Cutter then? What's in particular, like he's maybe different to most of the offensive names we've seen, where it's like less shotgun, less tempo. Ironically, we saw probably the most up tempo against the Patriots that we have in the last 2 years. But what's in particular about Dirk that you like?
Has a long history with quarterbacks and traditional style quarterbacks. So under the shotgun, or I'm sorry, not under the shotgun, under the center, like you mentioned. Yeah, I would worry a little bit about run to pass ratio. He is somewhat more pass happy, just based off his history. Although I will say he did a little bit better job this past year in Tampa Bay. He's done a nice job with Jameis Winston. Ended up getting 2 1,000-yard from scrimmage backs this year in Doug Martin and Charles Sims. He's a guy that when you have really good weapons, he does a very good job of maximizing them. He will feed your talent extremely well, whether it be in Atlanta with Tony Gonzalez. Matt Ryan did really well under him. Julio Jones blossomed under him. Roddy White. I mean, the list goes on. And obviously Tampa Bay is a myriad of weapons as well. And I think that if you get a guy like Cutter, you're starting to talk, okay, well, now Miami's first-round pick, I think, even opens up to a guy like Laquan Treadwell, if he's available, as just like more so as like a best player available, which I think Miami should consider anyway. You just take the best damn player on the board, because really,
it's not really an obvious team to take a wide receiver as well up top.
Yeah,
like there has been in previous years.
Right. So it's going to be really interesting where he goes. That's probably another discussion for another time. But, and I do think he should be in the mix, by the way, for Miami. But nonetheless, I think Dirk Cutter's not really someone that like I would be like pumped about. I'd be like, he's more like a career OC to me. Does he deserve a head coaching job? Probably, based off of his work. It's just more like, and I'm kind of at this place with like Adam Gase too, where it's like I feel like a guy like Gase or Cutter will be better after they fail their first head coaching job, because everyone fails, and so it's like a matter of if, not when,
and just like how much
not
lead the first team gives you.
Yeah. So like, and do you completely crash and burn, or do you at least get that second chance? Kind of like Josh McDaniels, how he'll get that second chance whenever he wants it. Um, so I wouldn't go that direction personally, but I think he's worth the interview, at least to kind of see what he says, get some input on what he thinks about Tannehill, what he would do with this roster. Um, I don't think it's ever a bad thing to interview guys like that.
And like Tannehill, Matty Ice, they're kind of similar, at least pocket quarterbacks, a bit different outside of the pocket. I think inside the pocket, they're relatively similar skill sets. Um, so I guess that kind of like makes it somewhat easy transition for like Curtis to like understand how you'd use him. Should we move on to Terrell Austin? So he will fulfill the Rooney Rule, which I mean, it's. I think it's. I mean, we could have a massive conversation just about the Rooney Rule, but maybe we shouldn't. Obviously, I guess the biggest kind of point of emphasis will be the bringing back someone that knows Sue, at least coached him for a year, I think it was. I really like Terrell Austin's like defensive schemes. I think he's pretty like clever in particularly like front seven stuff. Um, don't really know much of him like outside of just like Lions defense. Have you got anything in particular you like about him? For me, he's like behind McDermott and Patricia, who we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, I think he'd be behind as well, but I do think he's a good coach. He has helped develop guys like Darius Slay. Obviously worked with Ndamukong Suh. Not He didn't develop him, but he's worked with him. He's a guy that when you
Best year out of him. So.
That's true. That's true. He did bring the best out of him. He brought the best out of a lot of guys, actually. I mean, Stephen Tulloch, he brought the best out of. DeAndre Levy helped create him into a superstar. I mean, Rashawn Mathis, Quandre Diggs. I mean, he's got a pretty impressive list of defenders that he's worked with. His schemes are strong. Now, he's a guy that I think deserves a head coaching job. I don't know if Miami is the best fit for him as far as where Miami is at as a franchise. I kind of tend to more having that offensive coach, unless if you can get a great offensive coordinator like we've talked about. I'm not sure who his offensive coordinator would be, especially since it seems like they're going to keep Jim Caldwell. Interestingly enough, I told Jeff Risdon this, I would actually be interested in Austin if he comes with Jim Bob Cooter, which on one hand
that's who I think has been kind of touted with.
And that would be interesting. That would be pretty interesting because as funny as his name is, Cooter's actually done like an amazing job. And, it's been against bad teams for the most part, but like you watch that offense and they've actually made like real changes to that offense in the middle of the season. And it's been very effective. Now, part of that is they went back to things that were working better a few years ago. So there was already something in place to go back to for most of this offense, but he's worth the conversation. Like he's not just a Rooney Rule candidate, in my opinion, and he's a pretty strong. Like this is actually a really interesting year to be hiring a head coach, especially with Chuck Pagano now going back to the Colts, and Ryan Grigson, which is really funny. And also that's why that's one of the worst franchises.
And staying with San Diego, which makes more sense with kind of the turbulence of the franchise.
Yeah, it does. And even though, our friend of the show, Kyle Posey, I think he was right that McCoy's probably a little over his head right now. It still makes sense considering the injuries that they've had and other things that have kind of happened with that franchise.
But maybe with them dumping the entire offensive staff, like he takes on more of a play calling role and that kind of
and it's kind of like his last hurrah too. Yeah. It's basically that, hey, you've got 1 year. Here's your chance. And then after that, we'll blow it up. But
I do think that's kind of like an interesting point. It's like as much as we like most of the time we're talking about these guys as head coaches, but we're judging them off their play calling. And I mean, we don't really know if any of them will be play calling. And
That's true.
that's
Yeah.
kind of something with why I'm really high on Chip Kelly and Peyton. It's like, I know what they're going to do. They're going to call plays, and I know that they're good at that. Whereas with everyone else, it's speculating whether they do call plays, and then if not, who are they getting to call plays? And that adds like a whole another level of kind of just like complete guesswork. So to me, that's like the advantages of Peyton's, the Chip Kellys, the I guess the McDaniels as well. You've got some clarity of what they're going to do, whereas everyone else, you're literally just like, well, they're calling plays here, so I guess they'll call plays. But so that's kind of just like something to bear in mind. Like none of what we're talking about could matter if they're not actually doing that job anymore. We've talked about Todd Haley, I think, enough. Have we talked about Adam Gase? I can't really remember.
I don't think we have talked much about Adam Gase. I think we touched on him, but I don't know if we talked a lot about him.
He seems to be like the hot name. All the Dolphins Twitter is going apeshit for him and Hugh Jackson. They're like the two love fest. I think we talked about enough about Hugh Jackson. Although I will say Hugh Jackson kind of has a similar thing to Laser, where it's like lots of horizontal short stays at jobs, and like that's kind of a flag, I think. And yeah, so I mean, just like I don't think everyone's kind of saying he's like this a safe bet. I think it's just because like his dirty laundry is like a little further down the chain doesn't mean it's not dirty, and like I don't think he's that dissimilar from Chip Kelly really, in terms of like wanting limelight and the way in which maybe slightly different with players and more like gregarious, but I still think there's issues with players he's had, like Chad Johnson tried to punch him. So he's not exactly got like a clean bill, and he's kind of like Zimmer as well, where he maybe rubs off like front office guys the wrong way sometimes, or ownership. So he's not exactly like the perfect candidate either. But onto Gase, like everyone seems to love him. I went back and watched like a lot of Denver and Bears, and so there's a ton of screens, but I mean, there's at least like vertical elements going off. One thing I would say, like most of these guys were talking about are zone-based running games. So you'd probably keep John Benton with most of them. Adam Gase almost certainly, because there's Alex Gibbs in Denver, connection with Benton. So there's basically the exact same design of running play. So you almost definitely keep Benton with him. I think Kyle Shanahan, either Shanahan, you would keep him. Maybe Ben McAdoo, you would as well. I think Hugh Jackson, you probably wouldn't, just because of the more power elements. I think you'd want to get someone slightly different, but then I think that's also another issue with Hugh Jackson. Is like maybe you're moving on from Juwan James. So to me, that's like you're just adding like a couple more layers of questions with Hugh Jackson that I don't think people are really that aware of. Unless he just completely takes those power looks out of the playbooks, I don't think you can really do it with James at right tackle, or like with not one tackle that is particularly good in the run game. I don't really think you can do some of those gap plays. But what's your thoughts on Gase coming in?
Yeah, interested. I think he's done a good job with a couple quarterbacks. It's always really hard whenever someone's working with
Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning. Yeah, I mean, it's just like I'm not going to sit there and say he didn't do well. And Peyton Manning gave him a ringing endorsement. Like you really can't get a.
Also, like sells pizza. So
yeah, I mean, it's different though because I can't recall a time where he gave, another coordinator that type of endorsement. I mean, maybe it's just because I just haven't, been paying attention to it, but he's interesting. I need to know his defensive coordinator. He needs a really strong defensive coordinator. Anytime that you're hiring a first-time head coach, and I think that Gase can do it, because he's got good connections. Again, he came from Denver. Denver's got a great coaching staff. They've got deep roots. They've got a lot of talent. There's
Like McDaniels. So the coordinator that's been kind of linked with him is Nolan. So who was a defensive coordinator with Josh McDaniels in Denver. So that's kind of like the link. So that would be moving to probably more of a two-gapping scheme. So there would be kind of like some pretty big changes. So to me, that's kind of one negative on Gase as well. Whereas I don't particularly like Nolan that much.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And,
and just with like the whole Sue thing, I don't think he wants to be in a
yeah.
So, like,
and I don't blame him. Yeah, I don't blame him.
And so that kind of limits what you're going to do. Is there anything else on Gase? I mean, there's a lot of screens, but there are like jailbreaks screens that will be really fun for Devontae Parker to be in. And yeah, they're not like the screens are at least trying to open up some vertical stuff as well. They do take deep shots. You kind of have the personnel that's quite fitting. Like you have the Landry, who's like the Welker. You have Devontae Parker, who's the Demarius Thomas. You have the Dion Sims, who's a Julius Thomas, like just big chunky red zone only, maybe target type thing. I thought Dion Sims had a pretty good game against the Patriots, probably his best game.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah.
As in, like, he didn't drop anything for once. So I mean, I don't have a very like high bar for Dion Sims playing well. But I think there's kind of the personnel fits well, like in terms of like the run. If you keep Miller as well, I think with Shanahan, Gase, Hugh Jackson, and maybe Hugh Jackson as well, Miller fits well with all those guys. You probably don't want to pay him as much with Hugh Jackson just because Hugh likes to mix up running backs being a running back coach. But I'm a bit more like, to me, Gase was like, I like him if he's like, you miss out on your first guy. But I think it sounds like by the way Philly are going after him, he's probably not going to be in that position. So maybe Miami has to go harder after him if they really want him. But personally, I'd rather have like a Todd Haley.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I've kind of, yeah. I mean, the more I think about Gase, it's like, again, I don't think he's going to be bad, but I don't know that he's going to be good. So it's like, yeah, you know, if that makes sense.
All right, we'll move on to the Patriots. So both Josh McDaniels and Matt Patricia have been rumored. I think we've touched on Josh McDaniels, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
So we'll just go to Patricia, who I even before this news broke, like I wanted to talk about him because I think he's a really interesting candidate in terms of the way in which New England can keep changing their defense, and it's still good. Like I don't think anyone was expecting them to be this good this year, given like the turnover at corner. Now there's obviously the kind of situation as like Alfie from Jaguars Twitter was talking about this with Gus Bradley. It's like so much of the adjustments were Pete Carroll's, and so Bradley didn't know how to do that, or like it wasn't instinctive and natural to him. So I guess you have those question marks with Patricia as well, as like how much of it is Belichick's like experience, like knowing what to do, or game planning, or just like football genius, and how much is Patricia, who's like really smart guy, went to the same college as I think it was Matt Darr, that like engineering college, and just like the best thing with him is like I think a GM would love him because you can just give him anyone and they'll make him work. They've got really great value players in free agency. They've developed a lot of draft prospects of late on the defensive side of the ball. He's got a good beard as well, so that's good. Like him and John Daniel on the sideline together, I think they'll look like a good pair of cavemen. So I think that's like, now with Hickey gone, we need to like improve our aesthetic as well. So yeah, there's a couple of things. What's your kind of thoughts on Patricia? I think he fits well with like they do so many different multiple stuffs on the defensive front. I guess it's just like who's the offensive coordinator is probably
right.
a big mark.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I like what he's done with that. Oh, Jesus, no. um, I like what he's done with New England's defense, like you mentioned. He's been able to really overcome a lack of talent at certain spots in various years too. I mean, we've seen
Yeah,
even,
different spots as well. It's not like he's got
yeah,
like one.
some years it's cornerback, some year it's the front seven, some years it's specifically defensive line, and he's been able to maximize players when he gets the talent there.
And
Maximize
the
a guy like Brandon
experiment,
Brown.
like we saw that time when that first it didn't go well, but like Chandler Jones at five technique, that was awful. But it's like they're not scared to try stuff. Um, at least early on in the season, maybe that's just the confidence that they know they'll make like get a bye week in the playoffs every year. Um, but I kind of like that. Like it's whereas like Terrell Lawson, I think he's got his one way of playing, and there's not real much movement from there.
Yeah.
I think McDermott's kind of similar, but it's just that system gives you quite a bit of freedom, in particular in the middle of the park. But yeah, the thing with Patricia is like you can do anything, you can give him anyone, and I think I can't see many situations where he would like fail. So yeah, I think he's just really an exciting coach, but we'll see if like the Patriots even let him come. I think Josh McDaniels has been cleared, but I'm not sure about Patricia yet. And then obviously we saw like Nick Caserio a couple of years ago have like a couple of interviews and just turn down the job, so they could just be spying.
Could be, but I really do like the idea of him. If you're going to go defensive coach, I would either go McDermott or Patricia, I think.
And then, do you have any like thoughts on who would be the OC?
I really don't. I mean, he came up through the Patriots, right?
Yeah.
So,
So,
I mean, you're
like
probably
another interesting thing about Chris Greer is like coming through the Patriots. Although it's like obviously in none of these generations, like we've seen with even like Coyle and Duffner, it's like these things go back 20 years. There can be like one little link 20 years back, and that can be it for like just in the back of the mind. Oh, when I get that opportunity, I'm going to bring this guy. So it could just be someone like from out of nowhere that's good, or a college guy, or anything. There's always surprises out there. And should we move on from Patricia? Or have you got anything else?
no. That's probably good. I don't know if he's super likely.
Yeah, there was a couple of people who I asked if he was like going to come up, and they all said no, he's not on their radar. So they're a bit surprised, but maybe it's just like Intel. Another name we haven't really heard of, and I only kind of know fleeting, was Anthony Lynn. So he is the running backs coach and assistant head coach with the Bills, was with the Jets beforehand. So obviously Tannenbaum's familiar with him. I asked our friend Jeff Lloyd, who's a Jets fan, about him. So he was like a 7-year vet running back. He said Jay Ajayi would be like perfect for him. The Jets always had like good success with running backs. So I guess if like your team run the ball more, he's like someone you'd probably like. But and he said like players loved him, like fans loved him. So that's just like an interesting, like, I guess that's maybe when Ross was talking about they're not going to be like conventional in their approach. Maybe this is kind of like an example of like just someone they know that they like and trust, and maybe he would be a guy that they would look to have as like almost like a Dan Campbell-esque head coach, where it's like more of a motivator, and then you create an offensive and defensive strong staff around him type thing. But that's just speculation. I don't really know much about him at all.
Yeah, and I don't either, but I know Dan Hatman.
Oh yeah, he was really he was also in the Jets building around that kind of period of time. So that kind of speaks like quite well if like people are like psyched for him to be getting job interviews.
Yeah, and so he's high on him, and I mean, hey, it's worth the interview. Maybe he's someone that you bring in a bigger role, even if it's not for head coach. And I mean, I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to dog hires that I don't know, especially if it's for like a coordinator role, because some of the best hires of the last couple seasons were of coordinators that, quite frankly, I didn't know anything about. So I mean, I'm okay with going outside of the box sometimes, especially if you've got, maybe you've got a head coaching candidate. Let's just say, for example, it's Hugh Jackson. Maybe Hugh Jackson really likes this guy, and the Dolphins ownership just wants to get a feel for who this guy is first. I don't know. All I'm saying is it's possible. Maybe that this is someone that they come back to in the future, and they say, or like you said, is maybe he can bring in some strong assistants, and maybe they just get blown out of the water with him. I mean, people put down Harbaugh for being a special teams coach when Baltimore hired him. That turned out pretty well for them. So I'm not going to sit there and blow smoke out your butt and say, look, this is going to be a home run hire if they hire this guy. I have no idea. But there's risk with every hire, and I know that sometimes these unconventional hires, sometimes they end up working out.
Patine got fired. Would you be interested in him? I don't think as like a head coach, especially like going from the Browns. I don't think he wants to go into the Dolphins, kind of like similar doghouse of, at least in the national media, in terms of like outside view of what's going on. But as a defensive coordinator, would you be interested? Obviously, he knows the division really well.
So I have the same amount of interest in Mike Patine
As Smith.
being on my staff in any type of capacity as I would for Mike Smith, as I would for Chuck Pagano. I would not want them teaching my 8th graders how to play football.
And he's like, I don't think this game necessarily fits, and I'm not a huge fan.
He did a terrible job, absolutely terrible job, with a lot of talent in Cleveland. And I think that's what you're going to see in Cleveland is if they make a decent defensive coordinator hire, that defense is going to be pretty good next year. And people are going to be wondering, oh man, what'd they do? Well, they got rid of a guy who should be coaching high school football. Mike Patine was a high school coach not too long ago, and he looks like it. I mean, this is the same guy. He benched guys like Barkevius Mingo for large stretches of the season. He benched Pierre Desir for large stretches of the season, and then he would just randomly turn to them and play them out of nowhere. Like he played Desir as many snaps week 17 as he did like the previous 6 weeks combined for no reason. It doesn't make sense. Like this is a guy that he has no clue what he's doing with his defensive rotations.
Is there any other defensive like people have been fired, or I guess there's not really been many firings. It hasn't been a very black. It's like Sunday had more kind of movement. But is there any kind of like defensive coordinators or guys that have been out of jobs that you'd be interested in? That we haven't touched on already. I think we've been pretty thorough.
Yeah, we've been pretty thorough, especially for guys that like we know of. I'm not really too sure of guys.
Dan Campbell. I mean, so I know like after a couple of weeks, you thought we should do like a Dan Campbell one. I mean, I guess he's kind of been who we thought he would be. He actually, he pushed the adjusted over-under when he was hired, which was 6 wins. So that was a push. So that was interesting. But yeah, do you think he's getting an interview on Friday? So, and Terrell Austin's getting one tomorrow in New York. So that's interesting location, at least for it. What do you think they're just doing that out of courtesy? I think even Tannenbaum kind of said that was like, oh yeah, we said to him like you'll get a real interview at the end of it, so we'll give him one. So to me, it kind of just sounds like it's a courtesy interview.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they've been able to land interviews with basically everybody that they've requested outside of possibly, we'll see what happens. Yeah, with Patricia. So we'll see what happens with him. So, I mean, I think they're going to have their choice of quite a few quality coordinators, or even maybe some possible retreads. So, I mean, I think Miami's actually in a really good position to get a good coach. I mean, and we'll see if it works out. But, I mean, I'm actually pretty excited about the names that they've been interviewing, except for Mike Smith.
Do you think they go after Chip at all? Would you be surprised if you see his name?
I'm starting to be. It's getting to that point where
it looks like there's been a lot of linking him to San Francisco.
Yeah, San Francisco.
And I guess
I
maybe
saw,
he'd like to be back on the West Coast and stuff.
yeah, and I saw New Orleans as well earlier as a potentially interested team.
Chip in a dome would just be stupid. They
Yeah,
should really ban football, and I think if they put Chip in a dome, they might actually end up having to. But we'll see. Chip with Breeze would be pretty interesting as well. Just see how that works. Although maybe they can't even afford that.
yeah. I don't know. I want Chip to go to. Honestly, I want him to go to San Fran if he doesn't go to Miami, and that way he can get Jared Goff and just like destroy everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked enough. Is there anything, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about?
Shout out to Johnny Manziel to actually being in Vegas with a blonde wig on. I guess there's a video that's going to be coming out soon. So Will Burge from ESPN Cleveland, he used to be for ESPN Cleveland. I don't know who he's working for right now. It looks like Fox Sports Ohio. But he was actually a really good reporter in Cleveland. I don't know why he
Manziel around or something.
Yeah, well, yeah, like he's had like a bunch of scoops before stuff actually came out, and so he actually did confirm that Manziel's story is like this. It's gonna get really crazy with Johnny Manziel, man. Like, it's gonna be like the Greg Hardy thing, where only one team's gonna take Manziel, and it's gonna be Dallas, and then they're gonna sign him, and then they're gonna realize, oh, like he wasn't worth the headache. So.
Gilbert's sleeping. He's hard sleeping. God. And so that's kind of a lesson. Like, don't fall for like bad corners just because they're athletic and tall. Like, corners one place where like they got to actually be able to play. Because even when you can play, it takes you 3 years to learn how to play in the NFL most of the time. So yeah, don't fall for the Trey Waynes and the Justin Gilberts. All right, should we bugger off?
I think so.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Follow the show at Miami Pods, themiamipod.com. You can follow Ian at NFL Film Study and draftcentric.weebly.com and Bleacher Report. And I think just over the next week or so, just if any bombs come down, we'll try and I'll either try and get Ian on or a guest or just myself and like talk about it, because I much prefer talking than me writing really bad tweets for a long time. So I'm just going to tweet about washing my dogs. Anyway, so thanks for watching, and I'm going to sleep because I haven't for like 40 hours. All right, goodbye. I'm going to stop.